Why do we need sovereignty? How does sovereignty contribute to Jewish life? Even if we accept that we are in fact a people, that Jews around the world aren't just members of a church, of a faith, but actually are grounded in some national identity. Why does this national identity need to express itself also in a sovereign existence? What does sovereignty provide to the Jewish people? And how does sovereignty enrich Jewish life? The Jewish people are a nation. All nations have an inherent right to sovereignty. That's not something that a particular gift given to the Jewish people by the United Nations, by some international declaration. International law recognizes and has recognized for centuries that a collective identity has a right to self-determination, a right to govern itself. Israel is the expression of the Jewish people's inherent right as a people to be sovereign. Now that doesn't mean we can't be a people without sovereignty, for in fact we were for thousands of years as we lived in the diaspora. There is a collective identity which could exist and which has existed amongst the Jewish people prior to the State of Israel and even after the State of Israel. Israel doesn't exhaust the collective identity of the Jewish people. However, it is a profound expression of what it means to be a people. It means to go forward and to say that in addition to our bonding as a people, we want to take that bonding, we want to take that relationship and give it a sovereign expression in a particular place with all that that implies. Now this notion, this move from nationhood, from peoplehood to sovereignty, for most of Jewish history was an aspiration. While we were a nation outside of Israel and prior to the rebirth of Israel, next year in Jerusalem was the way in which we signified that our national identity has a sovereign aspiration. We want to go home. We want to build our own sovereign state together. International law ultimately recognized this, and the international community recognized this, starting with the Balfour Declaration, afterwards the League of Nations, and finally the Partition Plan. All of them speak about the formation of a Jewish state, a homeland for the Jewish people. The international community recognized that Judaism is not simply a religion, but that we are a nation. And in doing so, accepted the Jewish people's self-understanding of themselves and ceased the reality in which we were one of the few national entities, the few national identities which didn't have an opportunity for self-government and for self-determination. In fact, the Partition Plan recognizes not just the Jewish people, but also the fact that there's an Arab nation who also must have their own entity, their own existence, their own national aspirations within the land of Israel. Sovereignty is at the core of a national identity. And Israel is the expression, or one dimension, of that national identity which is at the core of what we are as a people and have been. And the joining of the international community in the forming of this nation created, after thousands of years, a correction to an inherent injustice. The world recognized, and in many ways, the Holocaust, even though this started before the Holocaust, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, and ultimately the League of Nations Mandate for Palestine of 1922, ultimately grounded the sense that there is a Jewish nation which deserves sovereignty. But without doubt, the Holocaust served as a profound impetus, as the world recognized we need once and for all to solve the problem of the Jews. Because the problem is not Judaism as a religion. The Jewish status of outsiderness, the Jewish status of citizenlessness, which subjugated us to profound persecution, the world recognized this simply has to come to an end. Jews need a place that is theirs. Now, that does not mean that Jews around the world cannot continue to be citizens in the various nations that they exist in. Israel is a sovereign expression of Jewish nationality, but it doesn't undermine the ability of a Jew to be part of a people and to live in another nation state. Jews could be American Jews and British Jews, Canadian Jews, Russian Jews. Israel, however, is the place in which that nationhood, that national collective identity, has a particular expression within its own sovereign state. Now, what does sovereignty mean? When we speak about sovereignty, what does it mean? Now, the meaning of sovereignty is in many ways the only case that we can make for sovereignty. I'm not arguing, and it would be impossible to argue, that one cannot be a good Jew outside of Israel. Our whole agenda here is to reaffirm the reality that there are Jews who feel deeply connected to the nations, to this nation, to the Jewish people, that they feel members of the Jewish nation and loyal members of the American nation. We can have dual citizenship, both formally and conceptually. An individual could say, I want to have no part in the Jewish sovereign story. I don't need to make aliyah. This is not the expression of Judaism that I feel is important. The revitalization of Jewish life throughout the world has proven that Jewish national and religious identity could exist outside of sovereignty. When I speak about the need for sovereignty, I'm not speaking about it as a necessary need. That without it, Judaism can't exist. A person could say, I don't want sovereignty. When we want to make a case for Israel and a case for sovereignty, it's not about undermining the legitimacy of other forms of existence for Jews, but rather it must be grounded on what does sovereignty mean? A case for sovereignty is not that which makes sovereignty necessary. It's that which understands that, number one, as Jews, just like any other nation, we have a right to sovereignty which we don't have to justify and we don't have to legitimize. Paradoxically, very often, it is precisely those people who do not accept the Jewish people as a nation who argue that the Palestinians should have a nation state. The partition plan says there are two people. Each people has an inherent right to sovereignty. When we want to make a case for Israel, we have to step back and recognize that that case is first and foremost grounded in our identity as a nation. Sovereignty is what nations get. It's the fulfillment of their national identity. But the second case for sovereignty, in particular for the Jewish people, has to go much further. It has to make sovereignty interesting. It has to ask what benefits, what takeaway, what does sovereignty add to the Jewish story? It doesn't make it necessary, but it makes it enriched. The case for sovereignty is one in which Jewish life is impacted positively by the fact that our national identity shifted from an aspirational sovereign existence to an actual sovereign existence. In that actual sovereign existence, a number of key features come to the fore, which serves as the foundation of Israel's gift to contemporary Jewish identity. What are these features? The first, and in many ways the most significant and self-evident meaning of sovereignty, is the ability to exercise power, to use your resources to protect yourself. For so many years, Jews were incapable of protecting themselves. Jewish foreign policy throughout the diaspora was very often, who do we know? How do we get access to somebody? Very often it was the model, we're going to speak about this in greater depth later on, the model of Esther, where how do we allocate ourselves? How do we put ourselves in the right place so that someone will see us, so that they will protect us? Who knows Roosevelt? Who do we know who knows whom, who can make a call? Whether it's in Spain, whether it's in England. We always needed somebody in place who could protect us. Sovereignty is about saying, that's enough. Sovereignty is about the Jewish people saying, I have a responsibility to protect myself. Sovereignty is the place where under Jewish law, when you see somebody attacking somebody else, when you see somebody endangering somebody else, when you see somebody in harm, you don't stand idly by and say, it's not my problem. Sovereignty is to stand up and say, it is my responsibility to protect you. Sovereignty, being sovereign, is what Moshe basically challenges Reuven, Gad, and half the tribe of Menashe to understand. He says, we're moving into the land of Israel. We're leaving the desert. We're leaving the period where God is the one who has to protect us. Now it's up to us. Will your brethren go to war and you're going to stay here idly by? Recognizing the responsibility and the gift of sovereignty, these tribes respond to Moses and say, don't worry. We will go first. We'll make sure that we will be there until every single Jew has their home. To be sovereign is for a collective group to join together and to say, I am there for you. This is in essence what the chief of staff, Ashkenazi, said in his beautiful speech in Auschwitz. What is our job as IDF? What have we formed here? We have formed an opportunity for the Jewish people to, for the first time in thousands of years, to be able to protect ourselves and to look out for Jews in danger. The Israel Defense Force is the defense force of the Jewish people, who will make sure that never again will a Jew not have an ally who will be there to protect them. This is the sense, or the first core sense of sovereignty. We could be a people all over the world. As a people all over the world, we could petition, we could use political power, we could lobby, we could send money. When we have a state, we have the ability to marshal force to protect a Jew who's in danger. This is at the core of Israel's self-understanding, when it also set forth the law of return. Israel is the place when you're in danger, you have a home. Israel is the place where when you're in danger, you could come. Israel's the place, paradoxically, that anybody who is attacked as a Jew, even if I don't see you necessarily as a Jew, I might not accept your conversion. You might not even have converted at all. You might simply be married to a Jew or have a Jewish grandparent. But our history has taught that these people are often attacked as Jews. The state of Israel says, if you will be attacked as a Jew, this is the place that you get to come home and you have a right to come home. Sovereignty is not merely the right to self-protection, it's the ability to self-protect. This is the essence of the gift, the first kernel of the gift and foundation of what Israel adds to contemporary Jewish identity. The second feature of sovereignty is that in addition to being a people spread all over the world, sovereignty means that Jews have a home. Sovereignty is not simply an amorphic notion with a moving army on a boat. Sovereignty is grounded in earth. Sovereignty is a national expression within the confines of a particular place. That's the meaning of a nation state. And sovereignty gives the Jewish people a home. Now we know that Jews have many homes. Jews could live throughout the world today in peace and prosperity. And we give thanks to those countries who've given us that home. But that home is not a Jewish homeland. It's a home in which I as a Jew could live, but it's not a Jewish national homeland. What Israel means, what Israel adds to the dimension of Jewish life, is that regardless of where you live, there is a place that is your roots. There's a place that's your home. Not simply a place that will protect you. Because a home is not simply a place you run to when you're in danger. The beauty of a home is that it's a place that you live and you thrive and you dream and you play. It's where you feel safe, not just simply from external enemies, but you feel safe to be you. It's a place which is yours. This notion of mine, this notion of ours, this notion of home is the second feature of what Israel adds to Jewish collective identity. It's what, in the Law of Return, when David Ben-Gurion described the law and brought it to the Knesset in the 50s, he says, the state of Israel, as a democratic state, must ensure the equal rights of all of our citizens, Jew and non-Jew alike. For him, the Law of Return was the recognition that Israel has and has always belonged to the Jewish people. This was our national homeland. And as we learn in the Declaration of Independence, this is where our dream to be a nation gave birth. This is our roots. The Law of Return merely recognizes that Israel is the state, is the home for all Jews who choose to make it their home. You could live wherever you want in the world. You could be a citizen of the world, and today, as a citizen of the world, you could be accepted. What's unique about Israel is that Israel is the place where, if you want to, you have a right. You have a right in potential. You have a right waiting for you to get to be expressed. If you want to, this is the place that will accept you. This is the place that gives to the Jewish people a sense of homeland, a sense of connection, a sense of rootedness to a particular place and a particular land. The third feature of sovereignty, the third addition of sovereignty to the meaning of Jewish life in the modern world, is the creation of a place which doesn't only protect Jews, doesn't only welcome them home and create a Jewish space for Jews to live in, but it creates a space for Judaism to live in. Now, this is a profoundly complex and difficult and even debated issue, which will be one of the issues that we're going to go into in greater depth later on. What does Jewish space mean? But one core feature of Jewish space, of Jewish sovereignty, is this is where Jewish values get to leave the bookshelves and enter into the marketplace. This is where Jewish values meet the road. This is where Jewish values cease being merely that which I speak about, and also that which defines my private life, and also gets to determine the public domain of a country. Sovereignty is when Jews own a marketplace. Sovereignty is where Jews own a hospital. Sovereignty is where we have to determine our own policy, determine how we're going to treat the elderly, how we're going to treat the poor, how we're going to create priorities in medicine. What are we going to do? Are we going to give money for in vitro fertilization, or are we going to give more money to cancer patients? There's a world of limited resources. Sovereignty is the place where we have to make this decision. Sovereignty is the place where we have to decide, what does a Jewish army mean? Sovereignty is where we shift from being moral critic to moral player, to moral agent. Now, world Jewry are not moral critics alone. Increasingly, we are invited to participate in the moral and intellectual and cultural and public fiber of the nations within which we live. Here, however, this is the only place in the world where it is the Jews, as a people and as a tradition, which are responsible alone for the type of state that we're going to create. And this is, in many ways, the fulfillment of the way we understood our tradition. Hear the echo of Leviticus 25. You shall call forth a year of freedom, where peoples are going to be able to go back to the land of their ancestors. What's the principle of Leviticus 25? The principle is that poverty should not be inherited, that a person who couldn't make do, couldn't manage on their own land, and had to sell it, there is going to be a period every 49th year where we get to start over again, where we get to tell that person's children, you're not going to inherit the poverty of your parent, but you get to start again. The sabbatical year is where we teach people that in order to create a society of caring, it's critical that those who have and those who have not should have a role reversal. That those who have for 1 year should understand what it feels like not to be there, not to be in the field, but to look at what's growing in the field from the outside. And only when those who have experienced the feelings of those who do not have is there going to be a sense of care and responsibility. These are beautiful ideals. Sovereignty is the ability to create a country which implements them. Sovereignty is the ability to say that a Jewish family is important. In particular, after the Holocaust, our story, our narrative, defines who we are. That's why in the state of Israel, until I think it's the age of 45, you have a right to unlimited in vitro fertilization, funded by the state. Because we are a people which wants to give parents the right, the ability to implement their right to have children. That's a Jewish value. Now here in a sovereign state, we can make it a priority. Do you know how many friends I have they came to Israel for the year, and precisely because they came to Israel now have children? Because they couldn't afford further in vitro fertilization outside of Israel? Sovereignty is where we get to decide how we use our power, how we take our values off of the world of theory and out of the world of theory into the reality, which is very often messy. Sovereignty is not perfect, and we're not always going to do it right. But sovereignty is an experiment. Sovereignty is a project in which Jewish values determine the public sphere. The fourth and last dimension of what sovereignty adds to collective Jewish consciousness is an idea which is at the core of our being a nation, but without sovereignty has difficulty expressing itself. The meaning of national identity, the meaning of being Jewish, which is not simply exhausted by your faith and your practices, creates a sense of identity independent of what you believe and independent of what you do. Outside of Israel, the primary doors for Jewish identity are denominational ones. And as a result, the denominational prism is the primary prism through which a Jew sees themselves. I am a conservative Jew, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, renewal, post-denominational, secular. Sovereignty creates a category of Jewish identity independent of your denomination. In a certain sense, that's what it means to be an Israeli Jew. Now, one of the tragedies is that very often an Israeli Jew replaced the Jewish Jew in the denominational sense. But that's not what sovereignty has to create. That's not what's inherent to what sovereignty is about. Sovereignty creates a possibility for me to simply be a Jew for who I am, and to create a bond with another Jew, and I don't care whether you pray, and I don't care where you pray, and I don't care who your mother was or who your father was, and I don't care what you believe or you don't believe. You're my family. And through the reality of sovereignty, this notion of nationhood, which so often gets seen through the prism of our religious entity, is now reinforced through the prism of our sovereign identity. Sovereignty is merely an expression of the way we have understood ourselves as a people and as a nation. The state of Israel is the implementation and actualization of our inalienable rights as a nation. This nation state, however, is not just a right. It adds brand new features to Jewish life, regardless of where you live. It creates the notion that to be a people is to have the ability to protect each other, not just the right to protect each other. It creates a sense of homeland where, in addition to the sense of belonging and home that I have wherever I am, there is a homeland for the Jewish people. There's a place where I belong. There's a place that I could feel at home. If I want to, I don't have to, but if I want to, I have that right, inalienably, a right that nobody could take away from me. Sovereignty is my ability to take Judaism to a brand new level. It's my ability to take responsibility for the public domain, for the good and the bad, but to create the challenge for Jewish values, to create the best of who we ought to be, and to create a society which expresses that. And finally, sovereignty reinforces the core sense that to be a Jew requires of us many things, but it is also who we are. A national identity which transcends denominations is one of the great gifts of the State of Israel. It creates a new and unique opportunity for Jewish unity. We know that it doesn't always serve as such, but under the rules of Israel engagement, under the rules of what we're trying to create here, it's not Israel as it always is, but Israel as it can and ought to be. Israel as a force for the unity of the Jewish people. Israel as a force for reminding us, forget what you believe. Forget all that divides us. We are a people, and as a people, we are one. That is the gift of sovereignty. Jews around the world, primarily in North America, feel very much at home in North America. North America isn't diaspora or exile for them.
Yeah.
They're not saying anymore next year in Jerusalem. Or they say it. It's a song. But they don't mean next year in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
They actually get worried if their children come that they'll actually stay. There's home. What does homeland mean for people who have another home? Is it an irrelevant term? Is Israel as homeland only a relevant term for those 6 million Jews who live here? Or does it have any consequence for somebody who has another home and who feels really comfortable and a part of the society in which they live?
Well, again, I think it can be multiple. You can feel at home in America or in the UK or Australia, but you can also want this kind of almost metaphysical connection to a homeland where something undistilled of your people is being acted out in a sovereign space, and that can give your life meaning and make you feel part of a project that is greater than just your life in your little community. It connects you to a much bigger story.
But go deeper. But I feel it's not my home anymore. I have a home. So you're saying this is a homeland. It was the homeland of the Jewish people. It was a past, but it was a past thousands of years ago. If I have a different past, a closer past, that's in Europe, or it's in Morocco or Tunisia. What claim? Where does this enter into my
for
world?
me, it's not a homeland. For me, anyway, it's not a homeland in the sense of it's the old country. It's the new country. In other words, it's the place where new things about Judaism can happen if you connect to it. And you don't have to. This is not something that the guilt.
So it's not home of memory.
No, it's not well, it is to a certain extent. But what's compelling about it is that it's the home of the future. Not home, physically home necessarily. Stays. If you need to stay and you want to stay, that's okay. But make it part of your life in the sense of realize that together we can be writing another chapter of Jewish history. And our lives as Jews can be more meaningful by taking part and recognizing the value of the project of Jewish existence, both when Jews are in a minority and when they're in the majority. And just, if you come here, and many people share their time between one place and the other. People can have 2 homes. They can have 3 homes. We don't need this binary kind of way of looking at things. So if you come here and you find a project that makes your life as a Jew more meaningful, it can be anything. It can be in the social area, it can be in the arts, it can be in culture, it can be in different areas.
So it's almost as if we sell Israel too hard, we undermine its significance. When we're speaking about the opportunities of sovereignty, when you recognize that world Jewry has a home, if Israel wants to belittle that home, then it undermines any chance of being significant in their lives. It has to add instead of belittling.
I don't think you get far by delegitimizing or belittling someone's choices. You can show them what they might be missing out on, what might make things richer, deeper, better. If you have this kind of hierarchy that life in Israel is like this and life that, you're going to push them away because they don't feel that way. That's not, at least a significant portion of the Jewish world doesn't feel that way. And so what we're trying to do, this isn't a finite, it's like you describe it like a pie or something, that you only have that many pieces of the pie. No, it can get bigger and bigger.
Yehuda, as somebody who lives outside of Israel, who's made a decision not to make Israel your home, does sovereignty mean anything to you? Not in the terms of a place of refuge or potential aliyah. You don't want to make aliyah. Is sovereignty something that's mine, or is sovereignty something that has any impact on your life in the United States?
Once it exists, it changes the rules of the game. It changes the ability for Jews to live within the world. It changes the standing that we have. It changes the place that we see ourselves in the world. And I think this is actually quite personal for a lot of American Jews, and it has changed from generation to generation. When I look at my grandparents' generation, I don't think it's a coincidence that the same generation that was responsible for building a lot of the major institutions of American Jewish life, both the national organizations as well as, they're called the greatest generation, and that's true for American Jews as well. It's not surprising that a big feature of, I think, what made them proud to be Jews was the emergence of the State of Israel. That part of what it meant to be the builders of the American Jewish Committee was also that you were the builders of the State of Israel through Hadassah Hospital and through Israel Bonds and through Amit Women and all these other organizations that entailed that kind of association. What it did for American Jews, for diaspora Jews, for Jews the world over, is it made Jews stand upright differently. Here's, I think, the irony, is that for American Jews living within an American nation state, or an American state rather, the experience of a Jewish nation state enabled American Jews to be better American citizens. It enabled them to see their place as more rightful among the citizens of the nation-state world.
Did it change the way people looked at us too?
Of course it changed the way people, we know this to be empirically true. Right? The fact that within the world community you had a shift from anti-Judaism to anti-Zionism, oftentimes with the same canards and the same accusations, it meant that Jews were now perceived through the lens of being a stated place.
We're not a failing people anymore?
That's right. So you have two success stories. You have a success story of Jews in their state, and you have a success story of American Jews who are living outside their state. But to divorce the two is catastrophic. To claim that American Jewish success would be even better or higher if we weren't burdened down by the state experience of Jews living in the land of Israel is, I think, misreads the fact that these two phenomena, the success of an Israeli Jewish state as well as an American Jewish diaspora, I think go hand in hand. I think they facilitate each other.
So is the American experience, would you argue that basically the success of America, the success of the current American Jewish community over the last 30, 40 years, is integrally connected to the success of the experience of the success of the State of Israel, and each community actually reached success because of the other one?
I think it's 100% true. We know it empirically true in certain places, which are kind of old stories, which is that if you walk around Jerusalem and look at the names on the buildings, right, much of the State of Israel was built by the philanthropy and generosity of American Jews. We know that story. The question is, are we prepared to understand the full extent to which that act of engagement with building the state from America to Israel actually changed the way that American Jews self-identified? The ways in which seeing the birth of a state enabled Jews to stand differently in the world, and to stand differently in America, to stand stronger, to feel that the identification with the state-building project, even when we didn't go there to live there, changed how we saw ourselves and was a big feature of the proud self-identity that American Jews have in the present.
I'd like to take a twist on that, because you spoke about the involvement with Israel, which ultimately created the shoulders or a foundation on which American Jews saw themselves differently, and which also the world began to see us differently, both of which enabled a flourishing. So sovereignty is something that impacts Jews all over the world. But part of that connection to Israel, very often, was a replacement of Jewish identity. You speak about sovereignty as that which created a Jewish pride. But part of that Jewish pride and part of that Jewish identification for years was that I belonged to Judaism through my involvement in Israel. I did Jewish. When I gave to Federation, I did Jewish. Federation wasn't just a philanthropy, it was a place which I belonged to. And Israel created an opportunity for people to belong to a Jewish community, to belong to Judaism through contributions, through caring, through voting, through thinking, through reading a newspaper.
If we take this point on its merits, that American Jewry and its success have been intertwined with Israel, that in many ways the experience of Israel helped American Jewry to articulate what it was, then it also helps understand why there's a collapse here. As Israel goes through periods of struggles, it's not surprising that American Jewry goes through periods of struggles, both in terms of its relationship to Israel, as well as in relationship to its own identity. What happened was, the way I see it, essentially American Jewry and Israel overplayed that single card. That model of, you're helping to build this state, and therefore that's enough from your own identity. Well, the state's here, right? And when it's entirely about building a state because the state is vulnerable, and the state is no longer vulnerable, it's very hard for Israel to continue to be that paradigm or the builder of American Jewish identity.
Right, or the source of identity inspiration.
The question is whether that's still retrievable in a way that has fidelity to current realities. Is there a way in which American Jews can be involved in the building of Israel on an ongoing basis, not just by putting up buildings, but by bringing the resources of the American Jewish community, the theological, the spiritual, the creative resources that are brought about?
The Jewish resources.
Right, the Jewish resources, in a way that is involved with building Israel, so that once again, the way in which those resources are used in the building of a state actually reinforces American Jewish identity.
When I think of my own story, or the story of my students, and living in Canada, we're juggling identities. Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, you're sometimes emphasizing your gender identity, you're sometimes emphasizing your national identity, you're sometimes emphasizing your Facebook identity. And we see that there are different qualities of that identity. A Facebook friend is not a true intimate friend. And what I see in the modern world is people are looking for that broad connection that you get, but also that deeper connection.
Like we have too many opportunities for meaning and there's not enough meaning?
We have too many opportunities for contact, and some of them are meaningful and some of them are not meaningful, and some of them we think are meaningful and they're not, and some of them are deeply meaningful and we don't quite realize how meaningful they are. And we have this thing called Israel, this extraordinary experiment, this result of thousands of years of longing, but also this completely normal expression of liberal nationalism. Just like Americans have America and Canada, Canadians have Canada, and Brits have Great Britain, Jews now have Israel.
So what does that do for me?
And what it does for me, if I'm living in London, living in Montreal, living in Melbourne or Miami, it gives me a sense of Judaism with a different dimension. It takes us away from understanding Judaism simply as a religion, and lets us understand that Judaism is a matter of a civilization, as Mordechai Kaplan called it, that it's also a matter of a people, that there's a story here. And I call myself a utilitarian Zionist, that I used my Zionism, I used my connection to this place as a tool for giving my kids something deep, something full, something that's connected and that's a story that's not just about 10 years or 20 years, but it's about thousands of years. And, when you go to an archaeological dig and you stick your hands and you pull out something that's 2,000 years old, you feel it. And when you walk around on the streets of Jerusalem on Yom Kippur, and it's silent, because the cars aren't going. And everyone's having that general experience of Yom Kippur, whether they're religious or not religious. And when Shabbat creates its own rhythms in the week, you feel what it's like to be Jewish in a different way. And you feel what it's like to be normal.
But isn't that the experience of someone who makes Aliyah? Now you're speaking about the possibilities of Jewish life here in Israel, and how, as somebody who lived outside of Israel, there's something that moving here has done for you. But our question is, for someone who doesn't live here, who's just a tourist here at best from time to time, at best, what is it, 50% of Jews around the world or in North America alone have never been to Israel? Is that the rough, or is it higher?
It's higher.
It's even higher. So why is this important to me when I'm living in Miami and I'm living in Melbourne? I'm not feeling the Shabbos or the Yom Kippur. I'm living there. Why is this important to me?
Well, when I'm traveling with birthright students, and they're seeing Israel for the first time, and I love doing that because it reminds us of some of the basics of Israel, they're excited by this opportunity to feel Jewish in a different way, to feel Judaism when it's normal, to feel Judaism when it's 24/7, to feel Judaism when it's all around you, to feel Judaism when it's in the markets, to feel Judaism when it's in the air. And it's often they who remind those of us who spend so much time here about how exceptional it is.
But again, you're at the birthright student. I'm asking you conceptually. I can understand it, and I think this is a strong move. Maybe you're saying that the only way to really feel the opportunities of sovereignty is to somehow come here at some time. And that's a legitimate argument. Maybe those who've never come here can't really feel this. But is there a way in which the reality of Israel could be relevant and important to the Jewish life of people outside of Israel, not provide a meaningful experience here? But is there a takeaway back home? Because isn't that what we're looking for? In other words, it's not Israel as an Aliyah commercial. It's not Israel. The days are over when the notion is that sovereignty is important because your life is missing something there. We have two vibrant Jewish communities who have to find ways to learn from each other. So could I learn from sovereignty without wanting to live here, without coming here? Does it cross the Atlantic? Does it go outside of the borders of Israel?
The experience of having in Israel today is so much more profound than it simply being a tourist place for Jews or being a full-time place for those people who make Aliyah. I think that the opportunities of sovereignty, the opportunities to look at a Jewish space, even if you never visit it, and understand that Jewish history and Jewish identity is not just about religion. That it's not just about the experience that you might have in your particular synagogue. That you're part of a greater story is, I think, something that is transportable. I think it's something that transcends your own personal experience, but can also elevate your own personal experience.
So I have my multiple identities in Teaneck. I'm in Montreal, and I am Jewish and female and French Canadian and a Quebecois, and I'm a Canadian as well. I have all these identities. Are you arguing that the reality of Israel creates the possibility that that Jewish identity, which is just one part of your complex identities, somehow is thicker, is wider as a Jew living in Montreal?
I think that what happens, even if you've never been to Israel, is when you're balancing, juggling all these different identities, and all of a sudden you can look and see 24/7 Judaism. When you can look and see a place where, whether you agree or disagree with the Israeli government, they're often making Jewish arguments about political issues. They're trying to figure out, how do we take this Jewish civilization and update it? How do we write a new chapter collectively? That's a very exciting thing. That's a very exciting opportunity to feel a part of it. And I saw it in the negative. During the worst days of the terror, you felt how Jews who even were very distant from Israel felt attacked. And one of the things that I've been struggling with is, how do we make sure that it's not just a negative association? How do we, in some ways almost in a jujitsu move, take the negative energy that people feel sometimes when Israel is attacked and turn it into something positive and say, wow, it's not just that because there's an Israel and Israel is sometimes under the gun, we now have targets on our heads. But wow, we have an opportunity to dream about a Jewish state, to dream about a Jewish place in a completely different way.
Is there a way in which the reality of Israel could be relevant and important to the Jewish life of people outside of Israel, not provide a meaningful experience here?
This capacity to defend ourselves as a people gives us a confidence and an ability to walk around the world proudly and be engaged as citizens of the world in a completely different way. When you have the ability to know that there is somewhere that is home, somewhere that has the ultimate responsibility to protect you, then even if there isn't a crisis at that moment, The way you walk in the world, the way you talk in the world is different.
There's a pride.
There's a pride.
Or there's a wholeness about.
Absolutely.
There's
There's
another
a
dimension.
confidence, there's a safety. And from that place of safety, you are able to dare a little bit more, to be more adventurous.
Is it just safety, or is it a recognition of new levels of ability?
I think at core it's a sense of belonging, that you have a right, you have a place to be, you have a right to have a say. You don't need to be worried and
You're
cautious.
out of the shadows.
Yes.
You don't have to be the worry.
You're not timid. You're not
That's
timid. And that kind of ability to say, I'm here, I'm at the table. And if you try to push me away from the table, I'm going to stay. I don't need to be afraid is a very critical component of how we are as a people, even if at this moment there isn't a pogrom around the corner.
Power is almost more importantly, it's the perception of power. It's actually when you actually have to use it, that's not the point.
It's the voice that it gives you.
It's the voice that
It's the voice that it gives you, not the physical strength that it gives you at that moment.
So in that sense, Israel has transformed Jewish life.
I think so. I think if you take
Primarily post-1967, then I would say.
possibly, we're post 67 when people felt that they could stand up. It has also, of course, had its darker side. But I think, thoughtful. Anyone who wants to think about this, just imagine Jewish existence around the world without Israel. Even at peaceful times, even at times where there isn't a threat, I think that there's a difference in the way the Jewish voice carries itself. The sense of confidence and the right, not out of sufferance, but out of right, that we have that conversation.
It's like the arrogance of the Israeli, of the tzabar, who's is almost something that has everybody wants a little bit a part of it. So when it's too much,
we could do with a little less, I think. But
like, when it pushes you online, that's like don't use your power so much. Give me a little more space. But that basic concept of I'm here too. Hello world. I'm out of the shadows. I'm here
right.
too. And you mentioned the notion that there's 6 million people who live here, who also need to be dealt with. Why is that compelling and important to world Jewry?
Well, I think it depends on how we look at ourselves as Jews. If we still believe that we are one people, but are expressing our Jewishness in different places in different ways, we still have a stake in how that Judaism as a whole is being expressed. I don't have as much of a stake in the way Judaism in New York is being expressed, but I care about it. I care about it because it's part of my story. It's part of my people's story. And I care about it because I want to be connected as an individual to a story, to a people that have a past and a future. And that future is in part being written here and in part being written elsewhere. And both of them have validity and have value and have meaning. And so it's important to me to keep both alive and to have a stake in both.
So we're almost saying to the Jews around the world, it's not only about you, stupid. Just like we have to tell to Israelis, it's not only about you, stupid.
Absolutely.
Now, we have to get over this notion that it will only be, that something's only important to me to the extent that it delivers for me.
I sometimes think about it that the historians in a different age will write about this chapter, this part of Jewish history, the moment we're in now. And they could write that this was a time when Jews in the world and Jews in Israel went off on different trajectories. Because one was alienated from the other, one was focused on its own crises, and the other one was living a prosperous and vibrant life elsewhere. And who will be worse off for that? We both will be. We both will be if that's the story that's written. And it isn't just about us, it's about our story as a people. So why choose that option when we have another one? And the other one is realizing that this is a partnership, which each comes to the table with some genuine values that they bring and can enrich one can enrich the other.
Sovereignty offers great opportunities, but it's not the single necessary dimension of Jewish life. When we learn to talk about Israel in those terms, then there's room for a proud world Jewry to embrace sovereignty. When sovereignty rejects the place of Jews around the world, when sovereignty says this is the only place to do Jewish for real, that might be meaningful for Israelis, but that alienates Jews around the world from this state. A language of sovereignty, which looks at how each community could learn from each other, as Tal mentioned, is the new frontier that we have to think about as we try to thicken and deepen not just our relationship with Israel, but what it means to be a Jew today. Thank you.